So here's the puzzle. Given the history that we've just seen, why do we blame people for their poverty? Why especially do we blame poor people of color for their poverty? Part of the answer is, I think, that many people simply don't know that history, and they don't know how continuous and brutal state efforts to harm African Americans have been. Along with that, there's been a long-standing attempt to cultivate and reinforce an ideology of white supremacy, which has reinforced stereotypes of blacks as lazy and undeserving. So what you see here is anti-welfare propaganda released after the creation of the Freedmen's Bureau. This was a national program after the Civil War to help former slaves access education, healthcare, and land so that they might be integrated into the economy. It was attacked almost instantly, just as welfare has been more recently, and wound up lasting only a few years, right? And you can see, look at the stereotypical image of the African American lying back, looking lazy with these sort of historically racialized stereotypical features of his face, and then there over on the left, the hard-working white man sending off his tax dollars to support the lazy black man. This is one of the ways in which that same trope manifested itself more recently in the 1960s. This is a campaign ad about affirmative action that made the same appeal to white voters. Programs to help African Americans will harm you. This is all part of what came to be known as the Southern Strategy. And this was a concerted, intentional effort by late century Republicans to get white working class people to vote for them by stoking fear and resentment. We understand that you're worried about your future, the message goes, and we know who's to blame. It's the Democrats, who are not only spending your hard-earned tax money and busting the budget, but it's going to those people, to the undeserving poor. And the subtext was always that those populations were black. This is what so much anti-welfare rhetoric was about, and it lies at the heart of the creation of the idea of the welfare queen in the 1960s. The strategy succeeded, and here's just one bit of evidence to show how powerful. There's nothing natural about thinking of welfare in racial terms. The connection was created, it was made. As seminal work by Martin Gilens showed in a book called Why Americans Hate Welfare, the majority don't actually hate the welfare state more broadly. Polling consistently shows support for a range of relief programs like Head Start and job training and Social Security, and people don't even hate assistance to poor people per se. They, in fact, consistently say that we spend too little on aid to poor children, on families, and on food for those in need. But they dislike welfare most. Why? Here's the sort of the thought processes that Gilens uncovered in his research. Majority of Americans think that most people who receive welfare are black, and consistently overestimate the percentage of the poverty population that is black. Thing one. Step two, they think that blacks are less committed to the work ethic, and this taps into those century-old stereotypes that we made reference to of blacks as lazy. And then third, they think that welfare rewards the undeserving poor, and that's why they oppose it, right? So it's not simple racism, it's a mediated racism. It's more complicated, it's more contingent. Yet, here's the unmistakable truth. White understandings of poverty and welfare are dominated by their belief about African Americans. This is another way of seeing this. More and more Americans being taught to think that poverty is principally the result of laziness. And again, this makes us unusual among our peer nations. And those kinds of images are still with us. You do not have to work hard to find these kinds of images about the first African American president. Now look at that image on the lower right. That shows Southern strategy thinking about as clearly as can be. Right? Elect me and I'll be robbing you from the hood. They're trying to be clever there. I'll steal tax money from workers and redistribute it to the lazy, the poor, and the illegals. Very little distance traveled between that anti-Freedmen's Bureau propaganda we saw earlier. Now, one of the ways this centuries-long effort to cultivate images of blacks as lazy or undeserving manifests itself in the labor market today. Right, and so what you're looking at here is a little bit of data from a series of studies done by Diva Pager, who's a sociologist, in which she got two students and matches them as much as she possibly can, right? So the same height, the same weight, the same build, and so on. She dresses them identically and then trains them to speak the same. They are as similar as they can be, except that one is black and one is white. She then sends them out into the world to apply for real jobs using identical resumes. Except, sometimes the white student's resume has a prison record on it, and sometimes the black student's resume has a prison record on it. What she finds is that the white student with a criminal record is more likely to get called back for a job than the identically qualified black student without a criminal record. And the best case scenario is the white student with a criminal record is as likely to get called back for a job than the identically qualified, remember, black student without a criminal record. Now, given the care with which these experiments are constructed, there is one explanation for what's going on here. It's active racial discrimination in the labor market. The effects of race and racism today remain powerful and persuasive. This is just one summary of some of the key literature. Right? We need to reckon with the fact that race-based discrimination is still a widespread problem. Right? Markets are not free and open. They are closed to some groups. And if we are trying to understand where particular people's poverty comes from, we need to recognize that much larger and perhaps more difficult problem.